I hope you're doing a lot better than me. I have very painful backs since yesterday. I was not even going to have the talk today because of that. I guess I pinched my sciatic nerve or whatever happened back there. And I don't wish it on a relativist, okay? Very painful stuff. I got some pillows behind me to cushion my back. And today I was going to talk about Mr. Michio Kaku, one of my favorites. In fact, I think he is my favorite guy. My favorite mathematical, uh, what is it, comedian. he's, uh, he's a stand-up comedian. That's what he is. Have a lot of fun with him. I mean, I don't know who listens to a guy like him who just comes out with nonsense and more nonsense and more nonsense. So I love the guy, and I'm gonna. I hope you take a rain check, and I'll talk about him next time. I don't want to have him, fade away. Okay. Today I'm going to talk about a different subject because it popped up with a comment and then a couple more comments that came around, and I thought I'd clarify all these. And so here's the first comment that came up. Fellow says, which do you think comes first, extinction or the establishment acknowledging the rope hypothesis? Okay. Yeah, he's a clown, huh? Very good question. Yeah, I got a ready answer for that. I'm going to place my bet on extinction, okay? The chances of the rope model hitting the streets out there are next to nil today. And that's because there's so much power in the mathematical hands, one, and second, it's so widespread, too much inertia. You just can't get a thought through there because people are convinced of black holes, Big Bang, dark matter. They've been drilled to exhaustion on all this stuff. You can't take it all back from night to day that quickly. It doesn't. It's not going to happen real quick. Whatever. And I don't think it's going to happen at all. All we can do is try, and whoever listens, listens. That's it. That's all you can hope for. And it's a shame, as far as I'm concerned, not because of it's my theory. I don't care about all that stuff. I don't care about monuments, all that nonsense. No, it's just be nice if people, when extinction comes, at least they have these views of how the universe might work in a different way. And one of the questions people sometimes ask me how I got involved with the extinction issue. I mean, if you're doing physics, what does extinction really have to do with physics? You could say it's maybe a branch of paleontology, and paleontology is a branch of physics. Well, many moons ago, I thought we were going to go out into space. We were going to go to Mars, then from there on to the stars, and then conquer the galaxy. I had this idea that so many people still have out there. And then I came across Carl Sagan, and Sagan, rubbed it in even more. We're going to terraform Mars and so on, billions and billions. And, I love this stuff, and I really, at the time, I believed it. I got to show my face in shame. Yeah. I believed we were going to go out to the stars. But then there was the issue of Fermi's paradox, and you had also the issue of UFOs, people like von Däniken bringing, the notion that extraterrestrials visited the Earth in the past. I never believed in that nonsense. But there was the issue of Fermi's paradox. Where are the aliens? Aside from the other side of the border, right? No, where are the aliens? How come we don't have any extraterrestrials here on Earth? No one visited us. No one has visited us, and we have to answer this. We have to answer that. This is a valid question, and there are several answers to that question. One of them is that they know we're here. the extraterrestrials. They're so superior to us. They know we're here, but they have this notion, this ethical notion that, like we would if we found life on Mars or whatever. We wouldn't destroy it. We wouldn't kill it. We would say, hey, it's ethical. Let's let them live. We're superior. They're inferior. Let's let them live. That sort of thing. Another one is that we've never been found by an extraterrestrial civilization. Then there's the other issue, that for those who believe in the Big Bang, here we are, maybe at the cutting edge of this expansion. And for all we know, we could be the most advanced civilization in the universe. So there are many answers to that question. And my answer eventually became, well, because we become extinct. Okay? And one of the guys that started looking at going out into the universe, especially to other stars, was this guy, Mark Millis. He worked for NASA. And he was in the, what do we call it, the Breakthrough Project. Something about, I can't remember the exact name, but it's a NASA project that ran for like 7 years. And they finally shut it down. And they were studying the possibility of traveling to the nearest star, and they finally gave up. And this guy, Mark Millis, now has his private corporation where he still does studies on going to the stars. And obviously, this breakthrough will never come. And so the issue here is that relativists, book after book that I read of relativists, they all said, hey, we're going to go to the stars. And, I started questioning that. I started saying, are we going to go to the stars ever? I mean, if the nearest star is 4.3 light years away, round trip is 9 years, rounding off. And even assuming we go, what for? Are we going to explore? Are we going to put a colony there? Are we going to exchange goods and services through 4.3 light years distance? So there was a problem with this notion of colonizing another star system. And then I brought it even further home, closer to home. And I said, well, are we even going to colonize Mars? And the issue there, again, was, what for? I mean, are we going to produce potatoes and apples in Mars and bring them to Earth, exchange them with the Earth? Kind of expensive carrots there, No, I realized that was never going to happen. And, digging deeper, I came to the issue of extinction. And that's more or less somewhat of the subject I'll be touching today to some degree, okay, but it's not going to be directly involved with that. So I started getting involved with also the issue of the Neanderthals. How did the Neanderthals disappear? How did Woolley disappear? How did the Anasazi disappear? How did the Clovis people disappear? The Mayans? A lot of these civilizations and groups, they disappeared, and to this day, nobody can give you a rational answer. So I started investigating that issue. I'm saying, well, let's see. I'm going to give it a try. I want to find out, how they disappeared because I just want to know for my own sake. Okay? And I came to a totally different conclusion than all these folks. Especially when, if you are aware that in the last 40, 50 years, I'd say even more than that, there's been a struggle. Everybody in paleontology who studied Neanderthals, they believed and still believe that humans had something to do with the disappearance of Neanderthals. And the more I got into the subject, the more I realized, for my sake, I came to the conclusion that we have nothing at all to do with the extinction of the Neanderthals. And so we have a clash of theories, okay? And what do these people say? Well, first it was war. Then we outcompeted them. There was this fight between the war faction and the outcompeting faction, and they couldn't reach an agreement, but it had to do with us. And the reason they concluded that we had something to do with this is that when humans started entering into Europe, that's when, about that time is when the Neanderthals began to disappear or disappeared completely. And so they said, well, we had something to do with it. Obviously, we came in, they went out. Straightforward, right? And I reached a different conclusion, that the only reason we were able to enter Europe is that, finally, is that any group that ever entered Europe, any human, we'll call them Cro-Magnons or Cro-Magnons, any Cro-Magnons that came into Europe, they were slaughtered by the Neanderthals. That's why we didn't come into Europe. Okay, this was their territory. Europe was their territory. They were more or less sedentary in that sense. We were nomadic. We came from Africa. And it turns out, we went to Australia. We went all the way east, 20,000 years before we came to Europe. So we went east all the way to places like Australia. We were there, but we were not in Europe. And the only reason I can think of is that the Neanderthals kept us out. If any group happened to meander, get lost into Europe, they were slaughtered immediately by the Neanderthals. And the only time we could finally come in is when the Neanderthals were rolling back. They were starting to become extinct. That process began in their world, in their civilization, and we simply took over the caves, over their sites. We found dead Neanderthals. And when this other theory came around that Neanderthals had sex with us, and that was supposedly confirmed in 2010, then I started looking at this a little more deeply. I knew that was wrong. There was something irrational about that. No, we had no sex with the Neanderthals. And that's the reigning theory today. The reigning theory is that they disappeared because they had sex with us. They were a smaller population. They kind of diluted into our population. And they got that through genetic analysis. Okay? And that's something of what I want to talk to you about today. Okay? So it comes at the heels of another comment someone put up here. See if I can get it in here. There we go. Can't get it in there. Okay, so it says 2 species are different if they cannot interbreed in the wild. That was my statement. This guy says this statement is simply incorrect. Whoa. Or are you asserting that donkeys and zebras, dogs and wolves, and lions and tigers are not different species? Oh yeah, they are different species. That's not the part you should be challenging. The part you should be challenging is whether they can interbreed in the wild. That's the part that we have a problem with. Okay. Not with the fact that they're a different species. And, I wrote a book about the Neanderthal, how the Neanderthals disappeared. And in it, I've got this thing about the Red Wolf War, and that puts the geneticists in the right perspective. Okay? And it turns out that, there was this red wolf that seems or looks or appears to a lot of people as being a hybrid between a coyote and a wolf, a gray wolf, some sex in the wild there, and they use that as an example of interbreeding in the wild. That's one of the examples that are used to justify that Neanderthals and humans interbred in the wild. And so I looked at this war, a lot of papers that were written on it. I wanted to get involved with that, and I did a real research on it. And these are the conclusions, essentially, okay? They raise an example of interbreeding in the wild, the groups. What was the problem? Well, the red wolf was becoming extinct. I think today there's only about 300 red wolves in the wild, okay? And some of them are being bred purposely and thrown into the wild, okay? The law protects endangered species. The law does not protect hybrids. And so the question was whether the red wolf was an original species, a unique species, or whether it was a hybrid between the gray wolf and the coyote. Okay, because apparently the red wolf has some features of both. Okay, so they finally called in the geneticists, 40 years now, since 1980. And the red wolf question was whether it was a species or a hybrid. After 40 years, the geneticists, after doing all kinds of genetic analysis, they did a genome, full genome on the red wolf, etc. they still cannot reach an agreement on whether it's a hybrid or a unique species. Why is that important? Well, it's important because here we have Svante Paavo from the Max Planck Institute on his gang of geneticists. And these people tell you without a shadow of a doubt, that's because that's the reigning theory today, that the Neanderthals disappeared when they had sex with us. And that they determined this because they did a genetic analysis, genome, and several other analyses, empty DNAs, etc., Y chromosomes, and so on. And they determined through genetic analysis that because we have 2 to 3% Neanderthal blood in us, DNA, right? That we had sex with them, and that's how they disappeared. And here we have the red wolf. We have these animals are alive today. They did all kinds of studies, and they can't reach an agreement. Why can't they reach an agreement? Well, they can't reach an agreement because you have two factions. The faction who says, hey, you should not protect the red wolf. Screw him. He's just another gray wolf, just a variation of the gray wolf. Or maybe of the coyote, for all we know. And the other faction says, look, this is an original species. We must protect it because the law protects original species, endangered species. And so each one brought their lawyers, each one brought their geneticists, and they can't reach an agreement for an animal that's alive today. And we have all three animals. We have the coyote, we have the gray wolf, we have the red wolf. We have them all in front of us. And the geneticists cannot reach an agreement there. And they have this fist fight because of politics and opinions. But here we have the geneticists of Max Planck Institute, and they can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that the reason the Neanderthals went extinct is because they had sex with us, and they determined that through genetic analysis. So yeah, I got a problem with that. Geneticists are overstepping their bounds. They're putting their beliefs in lieu of science. That's what they're doing. They're not doing any research. What they're doing is just telling you their beliefs. And so, yeah, I got a problem with that because no animals have sex in the wild. No two different species have sex in the wild. Even if they could, from a genetic point of view, more than likely they don't because of cultural differences between them. They have their own clans, or they have this distrust out there in the wild. It doesn't happen. And I cannot imagine humans venturing into Europe and suddenly you being friendly with the Neanderthals. Hey, buddy, you mind if I kill one of your mastodons over here, or one of your mammoths, right? All these animals, especially hunters, apex predators, they are territorialists. They are protective of their territory, number one, okay? They also have their harems and that sort of thing, okay? The guy protects that jealously. He's not going to let another clan, a Neanderthal was not going to allow another Neanderthal in his territory, let alone a human. And these people are saying that we went there and just said, hey, buddy, let's have a beer, and they had sex, let's trade wives, No, these people, whoever proposes that Neanderthals and humans had sex has a mental problem. That's the way I treat them. Means they don't know the first thing about anthropology or paleontology. He hasn't done any research whatsoever. The only thing he's done is read authority and take everything on the basis of authority. And the authority comes from people like Svante Paavo, and again, his group, they come up with nonsense. And again, 2 to 3%, what does that tell me? Especially when they can't tell me anything about the red wolf today. How can I believe what they're telling me about something that happened 40,000 years ago with only 2 or 3 samples? So no way. These people are just flushing their religion down your throat when they say that we had sex with the Neanderthals, and that's how they disappeared. And again, the issue here was that under all circumstances, just about, I'd say 99 or 100% of the paleontologists out there are convinced that humans had something to do with the disappearance of the Neanderthals. And I'm saying they had nothing to do with it, absolutely nothing. The Neanderthal died all on their own. They died when their population pyramid overturned and when their genetic diversity disappeared. And that happens towards the end of a species' life. To all species, unless a mass extinction occurs before that. which is what's going to happen to us. So I have a different mechanism. I don't need interbreeding to what is called admixture to show how the Neanderthals disappeared. And then again, the issue is, if that's how the Neanderthals disappeared, how did Heidelberg disappear before him? How did Homo erectus or antecessor disappear before them? You know, did we kill those as well? Did the Neanderthals kill Heidelberg? Did they have sex with the Heidelbergs? Is that how the Heidelbergs disappeared? How did Homo erectus disappear? Did Heidelberg have sex with Homo erectus? Is that how he disappeared? Or antecessor or any of those other monkeys? So this notion that a species disappeared because it has sex is just outrageous. It's because they don't have a theory for extinction. That's what it is. Okay, so another issue that came up, related, very closely related, is this one that troubles me tremendously. And this guy says the following. He says, even in so-called hunter-gatherer societies, there was trade. When you create an object, eventually someone is going to want to give you something for it. My God. These people believe that Basil hunter-gatherers were trading. And lots of people out there believe in this. And you'd say, well, because they don't know. They're not into paleontology. They never studied the Neanderthals. We don't know, you know. But no, it's the researchers say the same thing. Here you have one statement. These are all taken out of the literature out there or out of articles, okay? One guy says, according to Peter Watson, trade could have begun 150,000 years ago. Unbelievable. They're talking about trade, about exchange, about commerce existing 150,000 years ago. Here you have a paleontologist, so-called paleontologist. I don't think he's fit to shine a man's shoes. This guy should get out of paleontology. He knows nothing about paleontology. And he says Neanderthals, in a couple of cases, are trading shells that came from fossil deposits, and they trade them over long distances. Unbelievable that someone would say that, especially if he considers himself a paleontologist or anthropologist or whatever. To me, that's an outrageous statement coming from a guy who supposedly studied anthropology or paleontology or even geology and so on. Unbelievable that they would make these statements. These people are introducing things of today, our service economy, and they're implanting it into the Neanderthal or the upper Paleolithic world. It doesn't even apply to us, Cro-Magnons, right? It doesn't even apply to us, but they're introducing these notions that we traded and that Neanderthal traded, and that we traded with a Neanderthal. We traded seashells, who knows, for sex? I don't know. For furs? Is that what we traded them for? What would you trade them for, okay? And I'll get to that in a second here. And here's another statement also. You can see these are all people who talk about this. These are all researchers. And it says hand axes or stone tools, they were the first commodity. Axes may have been traded between human groups and would have served as social cue to others. It says the Chilean hand axe was standardized in shape, became exchanged in social networks. So, what is this? The internet or something? You can order it by through the internet. A marketable good or service that has value. Again, that word value, so dangerous. Everybody talks about value, and that shows you that he's a Disneyland economist. And is used as an item for exchange. So all these people really believe that there was trade, and there's a lot more articles. I mean, I've gone through lots of articles that Basil hunter-gatherers, Upper Paleolithic, you're talking about 40,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, that these Cro-Magnons, cavemen, Stone Age people, that they were doing trade. And the first thing you should note is that we hadn't even invented the notion of a tribe. Tribe comes many, many moons later. Now, at the time, all they had were clans, small groups, maybe up to 20, 25, maybe I would even give up to 50, which I doubt. they were relatively small groups, family members, extended family members that formed these clans, and they would go out there and kill some animal and live another day. That's the way it was. Some followed the herds. Some found a little niche where there were animals pasturing regularly there. Maybe they stuck around for a while. They became semi-sedentary or semi-nomadic, whichever we want to look at it. But this is all we did for thousands and thousands of years. Okay? And to say that these creatures traded whatever for whatever, well, let me give you some evidence here. A few articles that you'll read out there just to give you a notion where I stand at least on this. And here you have one. It says, talking about the Indians, right? In this case, the Apaches. Says each man made his own arrows, and each man cut a branch from a tree, and he wanted to make sure that everybody knew that arrow or whatever and that bow belonged to him. It was a personal item, and he took pride in having it. And we're talking about Apaches, which were already built into tribes, okay? And still the guy made his own weapons, not to mention a Basil clan caveman, okay? Here are the Pueblo Indians, same thing. You'll see that this is what people say out there. The researchers say each man made his own arrows, okay? He took pride in making them. Besides, he had to learn how to make it because he's not going to exchange out there, with some other Indian. Who's he going to trade with? The Sioux Indians with the Crow? They would murder him before they trade him. He doesn't trade his weapons or his tools. And here's another, another article that says, generally, each man made his own weapons, bows and arrows, right? Each man could recognize his own handiwork. And one of the reasons for that is the arrows in a carcass served as a means of settling disputes of ownership, which often arose after a great tribal buffalo hunt, okay? And here I'm just talking about the American Indians. You'll see this in every culture. Wherever there were Basil hunter-gatherers, their tools was a personal item, partly because he took pride in making it, okay? And second, because he had to learn it from the time he was a child. He learned it with his father, typically, with someone in the family. And then he had to know how to use it. Since he was a child, he had to make it and use it. And so this thing about trading tools and weapons, I don't know. And here's a final one on that. Says, again, others use arrowheads as a form of identification or a specific feather design. This enabled them to determine who had killed a given animal and claimed the quarry. Okay, again, and it says it was necessary for them to become expert marksmen as well as skilled manufacturers, right? And they developed their skills in the use of bows and arrows as children, okay? So if this happened at the tribal level, even more specific, it happened at the clan level. You built your own weapons, you made your own tools. Besides, here you have a stone tool, you use this little stone tool that you maybe hit a piece of wood or whatever you want to break, or you have a sharp piece of stone with which you cut meat. Would you go out there on a road in the middle of the forest, the highway that goes through the forest, put your little stand and start selling arrowheads, spearheads to whoever comes around? You go to the other clan and say, hey guys, I got arrows for sale. I'd like to buy some furs or some meat for the arrow. I mean, these people are idiots. These people, whoever says that is an idiot is a person who's not even in touch. He's got his feet off the ground. He's talking nonsense. There was no trade among Basil hunter-gatherers. Trade was invented many moons later. In the Neolithic, there was no trade before the Neolithic. Okay, and if these professionals have not understood that much, or never learned that much, or don't have the intuition to understand so much, they're in the wrong field. They should be shining shoes, cleaning latrines with toothbrushes. That's what they should be doing. They're not qualified to do these kinds of jobs. Okay, these professions. Okay. How about clothes? Another issue. You know, did Neanderthal wear clothes? Here you see they show the Neanderthals always wearing clothes. The documentaries always show Neanderthals wearing clothes. I got a big problem with that. You know, I mean, I've never seen a mammoth wearing clothes or socks or anything like underwear. I don't know about you. Tigers? I've never seen them wearing clothes. Why would Neanderthal be different? And for this, I can only give you my view, my general view on this. This is the way I see things. Anything that challenges this, I'm not going to automatically deny it, throw it away, but I'm going to look at it very carefully, because this is the idea I have in my head of how things progressed in the evolution of man. Okay, here's the our family tree. Okay, looks more or less like this, according to me. Okay, these are the actual bones that we found, so this is the best we've got. Not that you got to take this with a pinch of salt. Okay, that's important. Habilis, Homo habilis, he was there maybe 2.3, 1.6 million years ago. Plus or minus, these numbers are very, very general, so, you know, don't bet your life on any of these numbers, okay? But these are just ballpark figures, okay? You got to look at them as such. They had a smaller brain. We went from that stage to the erectus stage. From there, perhaps in Europe, we had this other creature called antecessor, okay, which is some kind of evolution between erectus and Heidelberg. Okay, then came the Heidelbergs, then came the Neanderthals, who almost everyone agrees descended from the Heidelbergs. Heidelberg disappears, Neanderthal appears, so there must have been some kind of evolution between Heidelberg and Neanderthal. And then we came from Africa. Okay, this is the general picture that I have in my mind. Whether I'm right or wrong, again, you know, we have very small pieces of our entire history. We find a bone here. Sometimes it's a tooth bone. They have to, you know, infer lots from that tooth. Okay, and so you got to be careful. A lot of paleontology is a very inexact science in that sense. All you have is theories based on the bones that they found, you know, and you got to be very careful with paleontology. And let me tell you, I just try to use as much common sense that I can put into the bones. You know, once I see a bone, a skull or whatever, I try to reach some kind of conclusion from that as well, you know. And again, I'm willing to change my mind on a lot of stuff regarding paleontology. Some stuff I'm not willing to. Okay, and here's a couple maps that I put in my book. In fact, in the Neanderthal book that I wrote. Okay, these are maps that give you an idea how I picture this whole scenario. Okay, we had Homo habilis. We found very few bones, very few skulls, and they're all in Africa. The Chinese today want to claim that man really started in Africa, in China. They would love to say this, but there's no evidence that there's anything older than Homo erectus in China. And we do have Homo erectus in Africa. That's the second graph there, the second map there. And from there, we can believe that Homo erectus slowly went first into Europe and then farther east all the way into China and Indonesia and all these other places out there. Okay. Now, the important thing to note here is that Homo erectus went all the way to Western Europe. He was in France, he was in Spain, and he was in England, Germany as well, right? And that was almost, not quite, but almost a million years ago, 800,000 years ago, 700,000 years ago. We have evidence of some human-like creature living in Western Europe. And why is that important? Well, it's got to do with this clothes thing, you know, because we had Arctic weather there. In fact, it was much colder than today. We had the Arctic sheets come down all the way to England. And these guys were living in that environment. And the question is, how did they live? Were they wearing clothes? No, after thousands and thousands of years, they got used to the cold, just like wolves get used to the cold, just like bears get used to the cold, just like mammoth got used to the cold. You put an elephant in the Arctic, he dies, but the mammoth lived in the Arctic. Likewise, you put a gorilla in the Arctic, the gorilla will die. But this fella, Neanderthal, he lived there. And before then, we had Heidelberg living in that environment. And before that, we had either antecessor or Homo erectus living in that same environment. Did they have clothes? Did they have sewing needles to, sew buttons or maybe zippers? No, these were nude completely. They didn't even have shoes, sandals, or anything under feet. And you say, how can that possibly be? Well, how can a wolf? We have wolves that sleep in the snow. They sleep in the snow. How do they do that? How does a dog live in the Arctic? He's got this layer of fat. He's used to the cold. He can withstand that cold. And so could Neanderthal and Heidelberg. And so could maybe antecessor Homo erectus. So no, these animals, these monkeys, they did not have clothes. So I cannot imagine a Neanderthal with clothes. That's great for Hollywood, but not in reality. They had no clothes and no shoes, especially. They walked directly on the snow. Okay, they were used to it. That was their environment. They got used to it after thousands of years. They had this thick layer of fat underneath their skin that protected them against the cold. These were completely nude animals. To dress them up is ridiculous, but that's what Hollywood does. And from there we went to this Heidelberg man, in fact, before then we probably have an antecessor. And then from there we have this map that's on the right. And the only thing I want to mention to you there is that Neanderthals, the ones that are in Western Europe, in Spain, France, Germany, and England, not so much England, but those other three countries, they differed from those in the Middle East, the brown area there. They have different morphological characteristics, and there's debate still on whether all of those can be called Neanderthals. That's why I don't put them as Neanderthal. I labeled them as archaic humans. And the same with those that are in Italy and Yugoslavia, in the old Yugoslavia, all those countries there, the Neanderthals that supposedly were there, I'm not even sure they're Neanderthals. Okay, that's got to be, established first. They could have been related. I'm not saying that they weren't, but they do have different morphological characteristics. You should be aware of that at least, that not all paleontologists agree that all of these are Neanderthals from Western Europe all the way to the Middle East. No, there are significant differences between them. Okay, so just be aware of that the jury is still out on that subject. Okay, so here's our family tree. We probably started 200,000 years, maybe at most 300,000 years ago. That's when our species came into being. What I mean by that is that if you take a person today, okay, this is what I mean. I want you to be clear on what I mean by species. You take a human today, and you took them, through the time tunnel 200, maybe 300,000 years ago, he could still have sex with one of our ancestors there, our forefathers, and have viable children. That's what I mean by species. If you go 301,000 years, you just step over that line, that other monkey there, you can't have children with that anymore, viable children. So it's like, that's what I call a species. When you can no longer breed with that fella 300 or maybe 400,000 years ago, that's a different species now, because you've isolated yourself so much from that trunk that you're a different species. And so here we have what we could say is the lineage for man. These are skulls that we did find which are similar to man, and you could build to some degree an evolution chart from this. We have your hood man 300,000 years ago. We have 200,000 years Homo man, and Idal to about 150,000 years ago. Okay, and these are more or less what we think were the predecessors of man. We consider these guys all Heidelberg level type people. We call them Rhodesian Man. Okay, known as Rhodesian Man, man of Rhodesia. These are general names that are given out there. Remember, we have very, very, very few samples. There are maybe 10 samples of, and we got to build a story from these. It's like building a puzzle. You know, they give you a puzzle to build, and they only give you like 5 pieces. You got to determine, you know, what the puzzle looks like. You know, maybe it's the Eiffel Tower, maybe it's the Chinese wall, for all you know. I mean, you could come up with almost anything because you only have very few pieces. And so, you know, there are very many theories on, you know, what possibilities could have been there. So this is just a general thing, and I build my opinions, my theories from these bones and from what I read in the literature out there. You know, I take everything with a pinch of salt. Paleontology, pinch of salt. You can't take anything, you can't put your hand in the fire for anything in paleontology, very, very little. Except maybe the objective, you know, like if you found a bone, well, yeah, that's objective. But whatever interpretation you give, that's up to debate, okay? Okay, so what happened with Neanderthal on his side? Well, Neanderthal suffered a tremendous evolution in the last 100 years. He suffered a tremendous evolution. I mean, this is how Neanderthal was pictured at the beginning of the century, 1909. French guy had an artist, he commissioned an artist to draw Neanderthal from the bones that he had, and this is what he came up with. And you can see what happened over the years. You know, Neanderthal suffered tremendous evolution. By the time we get to 2013, he's a movie actor, blonde and, you know, blue-eyed. And I went to the Neanderthal Museum here up north in Germany in 2015. I took that picture there, and the guy's even dressed. You know, they have, not only does he look human, he's dressed like a human. Looks like a salesman. Now, I would trade with this guy, no doubt about it. Okay? And so the question is, you know, a woman would probably have no problem sleeping with a guy in 2013. I'm wondering if a woman would sleep with a guy in 1909. You know, I mean, are we the same species? And after so many thousands of years of divergence, where, you know, Neanderthal was like 500,000, was born maybe 500,000 years ago, and we were born in Africa in a totally different environment maybe 300,000 years ago. We met 200, maybe 250,000 years later after humans ventured into Europe. Could we have made it, assuming we made it, right? Could we have had viable children? I mean, after such separation. And one of the clues that we have for that is that we have no mitochondrial DNA. That means we have no human today has any mitochondrial DNA, and that's been shown in at least 9 reports, 9 articles that were published. There's no affinity between us and female Neanderthals. Okay, we should have inherited some empty DNA from them. They find all kinds of excuses why we don't have it. We have no Y chromosomes. No man alive today has Y chromosomes from a Neanderthal. And Y chromosome is inherited from the father, passed on from father to son. And no human today, no human male today has any Y chromosome from a Neanderthal father. So we had no Neanderthal fathers, we had no Neanderthal mothers, but we had sex with these people, and that's how they disappeared. Yeah, sure. Sounds reasonable, okay? And here's a comparison. I want you to tell me if what you think. I mean, this is the way I look at things. These are the skulls of a Neanderthal and a Cro-Magnon, okay? I hope you can tell which one is which. Okay? Two distinct features: the eyebrows of the Neanderthal and the lack of chin. Neanderthals don't have chins. We have chin. We invented the chin. No monkey before us had chin. Okay, and yeah, I don't know. You might say, well, the Neanderthal on the upper left, that's an exaggeration. So is the guy in the middle at the bottom there. Yeah, maybe these are exaggerations. People come up with different ideas of what they think the Neanderthals looked like. But the skulls don't lie, and the skulls show that there was a great difference between them. Another thing you should be aware of is that the notion out there, and the documentaries reinforce that notion, is that we were tall and they were short. That's BS. Okay, Neanderthals were about 5.5 feet 5 on the average, and we were 5 feet 6. Cro-Magnon was about 5 feet 6. We were just about an inch on the average, right? On the average, we were about 1 inch taller than they were. That's it. They were all small. In fact, if you go through with Cope's law, as it's known, species become taller and taller over time. Tallest people alive today, people in Holland and the Watusis in southern Africa. These are the tallest people today, and we became taller and taller and taller over time. If you go to the Hollanders of 1,000 years ago, they were not half as tall as we are today. Okay, they were a lot smaller. Not only have we increased our longevity, our lifespans, but we have also increased our sizes. And that's known as Cope's law. All species tend to do that in general, except those that are stuck in islands, called island dwarfism. Okay, so Neanderthals were small and they died small, 5 feet 5, and Cro-Magnons that entered were 5 feet 6. So this notion that we were one head taller than Neanderthals, that's wrong, and that we were definitely weaker than they were. They were built like monkeys. Okay, they were big, broad. You look at their chest, their whole rib cage, much wider, especially at the bottom, wider than humans. A totally different animal. This is a totally different animal. It's like saying that you had sex with a gorilla or a chimpanzee. No, no such thing. In fact, we try to create a human Z, a cross between a human, females who were willing to do the crossover, and no chance, no human Z. Never happened. They have so many. When you read the literature, you have to be so careful with these people, because they put a lot of their personal opinions, their foregone conclusions, and they put them out there as proof and truth, as fact. And one of those is, when we started using weapons, and you can only go by the record, what you actually find, because that's objective. And this is one of the weapons, the one we used for a long, long time, and that was a spear. Okay, and probably the original spear was like that one in the center with just a pointed stick, and then eventually we stuck a sharp stone at the end of it. Okay, and the ones on the right were found in a cave in Scheveningen, and those are dated to about 400,000 years ago. Okay, these are the first spears that we have. Now, one thing I want you to notice, that they're made out of wood. And one of the claims today is that we don't find other things because, wood doesn't preserve well. Well, those spears are well preserved, and they lasted 400,000 years. So I think a lot of that is a cop-out. If you don't see something made out of wood which you suspect that someone in the past had, you better start doubting it first. Start by doubting first, and then see if you can prove the opposite to yourself. Okay? But it's good to have objective data, and this was objective. 400,000 years ago, more or less, that's how the cave was measured as far as longevity, and that's where they found the spears, and the spears do look old. Okay, so you can more or less at least use it as a foundation for any theory and say, look, apparently there were spears 400,000 years ago. Why am I saying this? Because there's a theory, and here I'll put it up here, that the first bow and arrow, when did that come into being? When did we invent the bow and arrow? And so there's a claim by a research team that 62,000 years ago in a Sibutu cave in South Africa, you'll find this article several places, people quoting it, etc. They found these sharp, what appear to be arrowheads, and maybe they were arrowheads. Personally, I have doubts. I have doubts because there's no arrow with the arrowheads. That's the first one. And again, the claim is, well, wood doesn't survive. Well, I just saw a spear that beats this by 300,000 years at least, and that wood survived, but here we don't see any wood. All we see is the arrowheads. Okay, that's the first one. Second, the one you see on the bottom, there on the bottom left, they're all elongated, which would indicate to me that they were probably used for spears and not so much for arrows. Okay, the first definite proven bow and arrow, this is a bow, the one on the right. And that was dated to 18,000 years ago in Mannheim, Vogelstan. And so this you can put your hand in the fire for. But the one on the left is just a claim. Another problem I've got with the one on the left is that, if we invented a bow and arrow 62,000 years ago, why did we enter Europe with spears instead of with bows and arrows and just hunt mammoth and whatever with bows and arrows from a distance? I mean, if we had invented bows and arrows and we had them around for 62,000 years ago, how did we enter Europe 40 but really 35,000 years ago? Because again, that's another issue, when we entered Europe. How did we enter Europe with spears? Why did we enter with spears? Why didn't we enter with the bow and arrow and start shooting? And yeah, the first human that we definitely dated, okay, in Europe is in Romania in, Pastera Cuoes. And that's the first Cro-Magnon, you can say, found in Europe, the oldest skeleton. All the others are interpretations, so be very careful what you read out there, okay? There's claims that they found like a 40,000-year-old man, Cro-Magnon man in England, and there's always this debate on whether, in fact, they didn't find a man, they found like a tooth, and they say, oh, this belonged to a human, and there's a debate whether it belonged to a human or a Neanderthal, and so on. So a lot of those, don't put your hand in the fire for those, but in the case of Pastera Cuoes, they found a skeleton. That's the oldest skeleton we've got today, and that's all you can do. That's the best you can do and say, look, apparently humans, us, our forefathers, entered Europe sometime maybe around 35,000 years ago. Why is that important? Because the Mousterian technology, the ones that the Neanderthals used from beginning to end, disappeared 40,000 years ago. So according to the evidence, right, if we're just going to go with objective evidence, humans, the first human appears 35,000 years ago. The last Neanderthal disappeared 40,000 years ago. There was a 5,000 year difference. Now, I don't think it was that clear cut. All I'm saying, this gives you an idea that humans kind of entered after the Neanderthals were gone. That's a better conclusion than saying then, oh, we intermingled with them for 10,000 years, as the paleontologists tell you today, and we had sex during that time, and in a little while they disappeared, and all that remained was us. Okay? There's a lot of problems with that theory from several angles, and I just can't treat them here. I did treat them in my book, but I can't. It's just no time to go over each fine point of why that's not even close. Okay? And another issue is, when did we start eating veggies? Were we always carnivores? Did we always eat meat, just meat, or did we supplement our diet with veggies? Okay, and that's kind of important also, because the question is, a lot of people again say, well, food does vegetables, they do not survive, whereas, well, meat doesn't survive for that matter either. But we have a good idea that those spears were not used for hunting lettuce. Okay, they were used for hunting animals. But people say, and especially today where we have more and more vegetarians in our world, a lot of these people want to show that humans have always been vegetarians. And I got a little problem with that, and I'll tell you why here in a second, okay? So here, let's go with the first one. This is an article, well, if I can get it up here. One article that comes out there that tries to prove this. A group of ladies especially, and I'm sure they're all vegetarians. And it says, an ancient grinding stone found in Grotta Paglici. This is in Italy, okay? And it says it's that stone at the bottom, a pestle, okay? And says that the scientists discovered that some of the debris on the stone turns out to be none other than oatmeal. The Rhodesian people heated the grains before grinding them with the stone in order to preserve and prep them for processing. The resulting powder was then made into bread and oatmeal. Well, I don't know. I have a lot of problem with this. Now, the dates, the first thing you have to be careful is about the dates. It says 33,000 to 21,000 years ago. And they try to push it as far back as they can always when they publish their articles. And they say, look, it's 33,000 years ago we were making bread. I got a big problem with that, okay? Got a big problem. Why? Because what they show here, this pestle, okay, and what they found is those little things that you see on the top. Those were seen under a SEM. Those pictures were taken. And what they say is those are remnants of oatmeal, okay? And they compare them against what you see on the bottom in red. Those are the modern day versions of those same oatmeal. So they say, look, we found them on the stone. So obviously they were grinding these oats, and they ate them, and they probably made bread with them. So they took a big step, you know, in their reasoning. They went from finding a little speck of oat. From there, they said, well, they've been grinding this. They heated them. They kind of, because they turned them into like ashes, and they somehow ate them directly, or they made bread with them. This 33,000 years ago, right after the Neanderthals went away and we started conquering Europe. Okay, let me tell you why I've got problems with that. And let's continue, because first I got to show you what people write, and then I'll tell you what's wrong with it. Okay, here's another, and these groups are all related, by the way. Okay, it says that the Neanderthals, okay, they were cooking foods. Although we found no pots and pans, you know, there's no pots and pans from the Neanderthals. But these people are talking about not only cooking, but boiling. You know, like maybe they did it in water. Maybe they made soup with it. That's what these people are suggesting. Okay. And why do they believe this? They found calculus in the teeth of Neanderthals. And again, the Neanderthals are primarily from the East, Canada. Okay. Maybe the one in Belgium. And the question is whether all of these were Neanderthals. That's one issue. But the question is, because they found calculus in the teeth, they say that shows that they ate veggies. Okay, this is the reasoning. Okay, based on what they see in the tooth enamel that they analyze. Okay, another one, third one here. Again, along the same lines, and by the way, it comes from the same people. It seems like the same people are trying to push this theory, especially this lady, Maria Mariotti Lippi, up there that you see on the upper left. Marta Lippi, okay? She does a lot of work on this, and she pushes her theory that, you know, they ate veggies in the old days. And I just want to point out what you see at the bottom, which comes from this report, from this paper. It says the starch grains recovered on these objects appear to be mostly of cattail and fern. Both of these are rich in starch, and as such they represent a significant source of carbohydrates and energy. And they go through an analysis of how much energy our ancestors got out of all this. Okay, it says Botricium moonworts, a fern that was widespread around the site and is characterized by a starch-rich root that is easy to grind. So they found not only a fern, but they found this cattail. And I said, well, what the hell is a cattail? I mean, never heard of it, you know? And so I looked it up, and here's what a cattail is. Okay, and remember, they had to burn this thing. They had to put it in the fire for some reason, right? That's what they say. And they say they ate this stuff and made flour from it. Here it is. This is what a cattail does and looks like. It's a plant that you open up and has all this fuzz in it, okay? And the question is whether they ate this stuff, or maybe they use it, for all I know, they use it to make pillows. Maybe for the baby, maybe they put the baby in there, okay, for all I know. I mean, we don't know what the context was to say that they ground this stuff to eat it and make bread with it. I think is a long shot. And when you put that together with the other idea that nobody eats ferns, humans don't eat. We don't eat ferns, but mammals don't eat ferns. There's some very rare animals that eat a fern, a special type of fern. They got used to it over the centuries or millennia. You got some insects that maybe eat some parts of ferns, but ferns are not part of anybody's diet today. And to say that, so if they ground ferns, were our ancestors eating ferns? Well, if they were eating ferns, how come we don't eat ferns today? I mean, we should have had this culture where today, would have evolved into fern eating. Then another issue that you don't find any mortars. Mortar is the bowl where you have this pestle and you ground whatever nuts, whatever you want to pound into a powder. You ground them in the mortar, and there are no mortars. All you find are if anything, the pestles, if that's what it was. And yeah, you can use the pestle to ground a lot of stuff. The question is, was that for eating or was that to make bed sheets? I mean, I don't know. Why were they burnt? Why do we always find them like burned? Is it because they cooked them and ate them, or is it because they softened them up for some other purpose, maybe to use as beds? I mean, there could be different interpretations, especially when, you would not eat the stuff normally. Okay, I don't think anybody goes out there and starts eating one of these so-called weeds. It could have happened, but again, all I'm saying, you got to be very careful what you read, because these people put this stuff out there as truth and fact, and you got to be very careful with paleontology on truth and fact. Okay, and there's again, just like there is a tendency to say that Neanderthals disappeared because they have sex with us, and that's the theory, and you got to swallow it because that's what we've proven. Got to be very careful with that. You got to be careful with people saying, "Oh, we found the first bow and arrow. We found the first veggies that people ate." Here you have these nomadic hunter-gatherers. Gathers? I don't know how much they gather. Maybe fruit and nuts I can accept because it's readily eaten. But to say that you go out there and get some weed and you grind it and you make flour and you make bread, man, that's a long shot. That's taking your reasoning quite a bit. And they start talking about how much energy that would give. I don't give a damn about that. Who cares about the energy? Would a hunter prefer to eat, some weed that he ground, which he knew nothing about, or kill an animal for which he had already a history of hunting and killing? Besides, more exciting than hunting, oats. In the field, you don't go hunting for oats. Besides, you would have to get tons of oats, grind them in order to produce a little, piece of bread. No, I don't think it ever happened. The other issue is that, these guys went nomadic. They couldn't take too much stuff with them. They didn't have backpacks and good shoes and all that stuff. So they couldn't carry tons of material. Whatever they found wherever they came. Maybe they went into a cave to seek protection from the cold or from animals. And so whatever they took were usually their weapons. That's it. Would they take a pistol and a mortar and start grounding wheat out there in the middle of nowhere? I don't know. I have trouble with that. And the other issue I have trouble with is there's 20,000 years between what these people say, which is 33,000 years ago, to the time when we really find mortars and pestles, which is closer to the end of the Paleolithic and almost at the dawn of the Neolithic. That's where we start finding these things. 20,000 years to invent the mortar? No, I have problems with all that. There's a lot of problems with that, especially when they have such different dates. Weapons gives you an idea. How could they have invented bows and arrows in South Africa 62,000 years ago and walk into Europe 25,000 years or 30,000 years later with spears? The first bow and arrow that we can certify 18,000 years ago. That's more reasonable. To say that you found an arrowhead and from there extrapolate that this was a bow and arrow, again, it's a stretch of the imagination. Okay, so here's a summary, okay, at least what I think. All I can do is give you a piece of my mind and you take whatever you want from it. Trade, here's the breakdown. Put it up here. Okay, what problems do I have with trade? Well, it never happened, I'm saying. First issue is trust. You don't trust the other guy. You don't know what the other guy's going to do to you. He's going to kill you. He's not going to trade. You're going to trade your life. That's what you're going to trade. Then there's nothing to trade. Basal hunter-gatherers have nothing of value to trade. Okay, they take pride in making their own stuff, tools and weapons. They learn them from when they were little, and they walk around with those weapons. Maybe they improve them as they go along or make a new one, but never trade it. This is a notion that comes from today, from service providers. They think they can trade everything. And then for sure, basal hunter-gatherers don't trade food. They hunt their own food and they keep it. They eat it. They don't go out there and say, oh, I've got too much mammoth meat. I think I'll put it on the market. No such thing. No farmer's market. Okay, no such monster. You don't go to the other clan and say, hey, guys, would you like some leftovers that I've got? Doesn't happen. Then you got territoriality. You have all these clans, they competed and defended their territory like a lion defends his territory, no differently. And so anyone who walks in there, in fact, another clan from the same species, he would be slaughtered as well. Okay, there were, today we fight, the Russians fight Americans, who fight Chinese. Of language, what are you going to do? Ooh, ooh, ho, ho, is that what you're going to say? Okay. Language is going to be a barrier. And then you have also the cultural differences. One could be nomadic, which would be Cro-Magnon, and Neanderthals more sedentary. They were in their own territory. Okay, so yeah, I got a problem with trade. Tremendous problem. Anyone who brings up trade, well, I have to treat them with. I treat them facetiously. I can't take them seriously. What is it? I have another one here, and then admixture, which is the other big issue that these guys asked about. I have problems with that as well. It never happened. No wild animal trusts. You don't trust, because if you trust, that's it for you. So female from one clan does not have sex with those of a different species. Okay. Even within species, we have problems. Lions, the way lions do it, they have to go out of the father kicks the son out of the pride, or the son walks out of there because he knows he can't stay for long. And then he finds a female out there who did the same thing and just got out of her pride. That's one way of doing it. The other one is the lion can kill another lion and take over the pride. There's different ways of doing it out there in the wild, and that's within the same species, let alone between species. It never happens between species, and people don't understand that. They think that because in a zoo you can put a zebra and a donkey together, that, oh yeah, it could have happened out there. No, it never happened in the wild, okay? Partly because there's no trust, okay? Basal hunter-gatherers, they have a clan structure. We have the territoriality issue. They compete and fight. They make war, not love. It's always war, okay? There's the issue of shouting range. A female would not walk out into the middle of nowhere where she has no protection. She has no 911 from her own clan. And again, the issue there with the shouting is that that's her 911. Help! That's the way it happened. She can't go beyond shouting distance. She's not going to get lost because, in these service societies, people are too stupid to understand this. But in the wild, you don't get lost from your clan because that's your protection. That's your 911. That's your police. Those are the guys who are going to defend you. So, they stuck together and they know how to protect themselves because not only could there be a Reconnected, and so, you got to stick together and you can't walk too far away from your clan because you have no protection and another animal can kill you. So people are not stupid. The Basil hunter-gatherers, they were not stupid. They knew how to take care of themselves. And certainly none of these service providers of today know how to take care of themselves because they think 911 is, they just lift the phone and call the police or whatever. I don't know what they have going through their minds. So no, you got to be within shouting range. You can't be too, or some other signal that you could give to your clans. Clothes. We wore clothes because we invented the needle. And we invented the needle around the time we entered Europe. And we had to invent the needle because we were cold. We were not used to the cold. So when we went into Europe, we did put furs on. The Neanderthals, they had no needles. We never found needles among them. And you need to sew things together in order to protect yourself if you need it. But if you live there for 100,000 years, 200,000 years, 300,000 years, I'm sure you're going to get used to the cold and build a layer of fat underneath your skin. And for sure, I'm almost sure, even though I can't prove it, obviously, that the Neanderthals were furry creatures. Just like, the mammoth is a furry creature, whereas the elephant is not. And they were gorillas. They had hairs for sure all over. It looked more like the guy in 1909 than the guy in 2013 for sure. Language, big problem for admixture. How do you say, hey, honey, I love you? Would you like to have sex with me? How do you talk to another species? In fact, I don't even think that all the Cro-Magnons had the same language. Okay, keep that in mind. You find another clan out there, they speak a different language. You go ooh ooh and they go ah. So, how do you understand them? Sign language. So that's another issue. Culture also. If one is nomadic, the other one is sedentary. That also stops. It interferes with the admixture theory. No mitochondrial DNA, no Y chromosome, and Cro-Magnon, I'm saying, entered Europe 35,000 years ago. Neanderthal apparently disappeared earlier. I think that as Neanderthals were dying, the other guys were entering. Thousands of years where one was imploding, the other one was expanding. That's the way I look at things. Is this all ground in stone? Should you take it to the bank? No. I'm saying that anything related to paleontology should be taken with a pinch of salt. All I can tell you is my theory, and that's that the Neanderthals died all on their own. They had no help from man. They died when their population pyramid overturned and they lost their genetic diversity. That's the same way Heidelberg died. That's the same way Antecessor died, and that's the same way that Homo erectus died. They disappear when their population pyramid overturns and their genetic diversity disappears. That's my 10 cents worth. Take it to the bank or keep it to yourself. But that's my contribution. And yes, I will see you on Sunday. I'll be talking this time around. Yes, I will talking about my favorite subject, which is Michio Kaku.